So thank you again for joining our Unite for Nature webinar series. I'm Jodie Gunn, the CEO of the Australian Land Conservation Alliance, the peak body that represents private land conservation organisations that are protecting, managing and restoring nature across privately managed land. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and note their long and enduring connection to and continuing management and responsibility of country. And really critical to that is nature as a central role and a keystone of our well-being, our food security, our economies and our cultures. And this is increasingly recognised from Parliament to community, around dinner tables and board tables, at farm gates and school gates. Society is taking note and steps to remedy the declining condition of our natural environment. And together we are driven by our collective responsibility to stem the tide of loss and decline. So in response, we are seeing an increasing growth of innovative collaborations, long-standing partnerships and visionary thinking that's unlocking finance, galvanising action and forging networks to amplify the ongoing urgent management, protection and restoration of country. Our conference is not far away. We are getting excited. And as we warm up to our conference on Ngunnawal country in October, this four-part webinar series is showcasing the important and unique and diverse partnerships across industries, across cultures, and we're really thrilled to be sharing the stories as we make our way towards PLC 23. So to kick things off today, we're going to hear about the partnership between the Australian Wildlife Conservancy, one of ALCA's members and partner of our conference, and one of the world's largest organisations delivering and influencing effective conservation across nearly 13 million hectares in iconic regions across Australia, and their partnership with the New South Wales National Parks and Wild Service at the Pilliga and Mallee Cliffs National Parks. So to share this journey, I'm joined today by Tim White, the Chief Operating Officer of the Australian Wildlife Conservancy. Say hi, Tim. Tim is a highly experienced conservation land manager with almost 3 decades practicing contemporary land management across Australia, particularly in far north Queensland. Tim has an impressive career, which includes 17 years managing national parks in far north Queensland and on Cape York Peninsula, and with the Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service before joining AWC, through which he has held various leadership positions, including the Regional Operations Manager in the North East. Joining Tim is one of AWC's key partners, David Kelly, who is the Manager of the Threatened Species, Dave say hello, of the New South Wales Parks and Wildlife Service. Dave oversees a major threatened species projects across New South Wales, including the New South Wales Parks and Wildlife Service Feral Predator Free Area Program. So David has a long history of successful delivery of large-scale conservation and restoration programs. More than 30 years experience in protected area management, working closely with traditional owners and Aboriginal people, and the delivery of major environmental programs. They include the coordination of threatened species programs, feral animal and weed eradications, fire management, and the design and delivery of environmental monitoring, evaluation and reporting. Wow, I'm very excited to be joined by such talented people. So before we get started, for those of you who have joined us, a couple of rules for engagement. You are all on mute and without video. So unfortunately, we can't see or hear you, but that doesn't mean you can't engage. So please do reach out to us through the chat function. Let us know the country that you're dialing in from today and that you're there. And there is also the Q&A function. Both of these are open. Please use the chat for chatting and as I said, letting us know about who you are and where you're coming from. Use the Q&A function only for questions. So please do, as Dave and Tim talk to us about their work, start entering your questions as they come up. Uptick your questions so that we can prioritise those questions that people want answered. And I'll come to a Q&A session after the formal presentation. But we will start with Tim and Dave telling us about their partnership, followed by a facilitated Q&A from me, and then I'll open it up to the questions that are coming in from the audience. So to start things off today, Dave, I believe you're kicking off the presentation. So over to you to get things started.
Thank you, Jodie, and g'day everyone. As Jodie mentioned, my name is David Kelly. I'm the manager of the National Parks and Wildlife Service Threatened Species Unit and have oversight of what is the New South Wales National Parks Feral Predator Free Area Program. I'd like to start the presentation by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. In my case, it's the Arakwal people and the Arakwal country of the north coast of New South Wales, and show my respect to elders past and present and any Aboriginal people joining the webinar series today. So for context, I'd like to just explain that Australia has possibly the worst mammal extinction record in the world, with over 30 mammal species that have been driven to extinction in the last 250 years. Of these, we know that cats and foxes have been the main drivers for at least 2/3 of these losses. Many remaining mammals, but also reptiles, amphibians, and birds are declining severely in both their distribution and density across the landscape. And again, cats and foxes have been implicated in most of these declines. At this point in time, there is no effective strategy for the removal of cats. And as part of a national parks, strategy for conservation, we're looking at the establishment of a network of feral predator-free areas across the state to halt and reverse the extinction record. So, as you can see on the map, we currently have 3 established feral predator-free areas in New South Wales, which have been established in partnership with AWC and also with Wild Desert, so collaboration with the University of New South Wales and Ecological Horizons. The Pilliga State Conservation Area in the centre of the screen and Mallee Cliffs National Park have been created in partnership with AWC. But you can also see in orange, we are in the process of establishing 4 other sites, one on the north coast, one on the south coast, one in Western Sydney, and a large site in central New South Wales at Yathong Nature Reserve. Next slide, please. Overall, the program aims to establish and maintain viable populations of 28 species which are locally extinct, of which 23 of those are threatened and 5 are locally extinct protected species. In addition, we aim to improve the trajectory of the extant or existing resident fauna at each of the 4 sites, improve the ecological health and functioning at these sites, and reduce or eliminate threats such as predation, but also fire and weeds from these sites as well. Next slide. The program overall aims to have a conservation benefit to over 50 threatened species. We're looking at reintroducing 9 mammal species which are currently extinct in New South Wales. Those species include iconic species such as the greater bilby, western quoll, and eastern bettong. In addition, we're looking to establish new populations of locally extinct species like long-footed potteroo, which have not been recorded in New South Wales for some time, eastern quoll, and also bushfire-affected species such as smoky mouse. But overall, the program will benefit a number of other threatened species simply by removing predators, but also managing those key threats and we'll see a significant conservation benefit for at least 30 other species. The program overall, we see as restoring the overall ecosystem health and functioning, improving the trajectory of not only those reintroduced species, but the extant species and their extinction risk. By doing this, we'll improve landscape resilience and also the awareness of not only threatened species, their status, but also the threatening processes that affect them, and hopefully the knowledge of the community in supporting these types of programs. So that's it for me. Thank you, Jodie.
Good morning, Jodie. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Dave. My name is Tim White. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for AWC, Australian Wildlife Conservancy. Thanks for the kind introduction this morning, Jodie. And thanks, Dave. Equally, I pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which I'm sitting, Cubby Cubby and Bachelor Country and the Sunshine Coast hinterland, South East Queensland, and to traditional owners across Australia where we live and work. Continuing with the slides, Australia has a very poor record of protecting its wildlife. We've got the worst record of recent mammal extinctions. Up to 34 mammals have gone extinct since European settlement. And in comparison, in North America, they've suffered only one extinction during the same period. We tend to think of extinctions as historic, but the rate of animal extinctions has been constant, and as you can see, continues through the present day, if not increasing. This graph shows the number of threatened species listed in our legislation over time, and the trajectory very clearly suggests that more extinctions are inevitable unless something's done. The 2021 Australian State of the Environment report paints a fairly bleak picture of the decline in Australia's native animals and ecosystems. Since the release of the previous report in 2016, there's been an 8% increase in the number of threatened species, and as I mentioned, more extinctions are expected. But beyond all that news, the report also identifies some bright spots, some reasons to remain hopeful. And from AWC's perspective, our investment in feral predator-free safe havens, as we're discussing this morning, and the practical approach to the management of ecosystems are two of them. Australian Wildlife Conservancy's mission is very clear: to see all Australian native animal species effectively conserved. To achieve our mission over the last 30 years, Australian Wildlife Conservancy has developed a practical model that conserves and restores biodiversity. But we also acknowledge that there are more and more stories every year that provide hope for Australia's wildlife. We think the tide is turning, and everyone today in the webinar is playing a part in the shift. The way in which Australian Wildlife Conservancy goes about achieving our mission is by focusing our efforts in these four areas: establishing sanctuaries, delivering on-ground management, science, and public education. Okay, so we often talk about scaling up with conservation-based land management and science. And as the orange bubbles on this graph show, traditionally our approach has been to acquire land directly and implement conservation programs on that land ourselves as the leaseholders or the landholders. But by 2010 and around that period, it became apparent to us that the value of land was soaring, and in many areas very clearly outpaced our capacity to acquire land directly. We also recognised that this clearly was a trend that was likely to continue. We recognised that we couldn't achieve our mission, as I've mentioned before, alone, and that establishing partnerships and collaborations provided a much faster and more effective pathway towards achieving our goals, particularly in terms of scaling up the application of our model. As you can see from the blue bubbles, over time, our focus has now been driven by a need to look beyond traditional private conservation reserves. We need new and innovative ways of operating if we are to deliver the results at a landscape level and the results that we need. So while we'll no doubt continue to acquire land when the opportunity arises, the focus has certainly shifted to partnerships and collaborations with Indigenous people, Indigenous landholders, government at both levels, and corporate entities as being the most effective way to delivering better conservation outcomes. Our partnership with the New South Wales Government is a great story and a great example of how effectively this model is working. In 2016, we entered into a historic partnership with the New South Wales Government to implement Australian Wildlife Conservancy's model for conservation at two sites, Pilliga Conservation Area and Millie Cliffs National Park. It's the first time an Australian government had partnered with a not-for-profit to deliver conservation on public land, and the partnership includes the establishment of two large-scale feral predator-free fenced areas in National Park protected area, and the reintroduction of at least 10 mammal species. Across the two sites, Australian Wildlife Conservancy and New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service have already introduced 6 species: numbats, greater stick-nest rats, bridle mat-tail wallabies, bilbies, woylies and red-tailed phascogales. A key part of the project has also involved constructing a conservation hub and an operations space at the Pilliga and Millie Cliffs project sites. These hubs provide a high-quality workspace for our teams, reducing travel time and other operational improvements. We hope that ultimately some species will be able to be reintroduced outside of fenced areas. We are already trialling this at Australian Wildlife Conservancy's Mount Gibson Wildlife Sanctuary in Western Australia, and it involves obviously very intensive feral predator control. In May last year, we conducted the first release outside the fence at Mount Gibson of the common brush-tailed possum, and the population is being monitored and so far doing really well. This year also we released the western koala chuditch outside the fence, and we're monitoring their progress. That's it. Thanks, Jodie.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dave and Tim. That was very interesting and inspiring to hear of the work that's happening across your collective efforts. So you've described very well the challenge or the problem that this project is seeking to solve. You know, the challenges we face with species continuing decline. Who came forward to initially identify the challenge of partnering and working together on this?
Do you want me to go first, Tim?
I'll get over today.
It's a good question, Jodie. Obviously, there's general broad scientific consensus that fenced feral predator-free areas are required and are a part of any threatened species program going forward, that we need a medium to long-term solution to protect our wildlife. And that scientific literature has been the basis of the establishment of these sites. But in New South Wales, the overall project began from a proposal from AWC to the New South Wales Government, the New South Wales government then called for expressions of interest. We received a number of different submissions from a number of parties, and we eventually entered into a contractual agreements with AWC and Wild Deserts back in 2016.
Yeah, great. So in that context, and just a reminder, I'll do a bit of Q&A to begin with, but audience, please do put in any questions that you have in the chat, and I'll come to those as well. So in the context then, of AWC putting in the the initial suggestion, Tim, can you describe a little bit the successes that the Australian Wildlife Conservancy has had over its time in establishing and managing these threatened species sanctuaries? You've talked about those and the expansion to parks, but in the experience that you've had and why you came to make the recommendation to parks to partner.
Yeah, thanks, Jodie. So AWC has certainly we think we've got a proven track record of providing the feral predator proof fenced areas as a safe haven in an opportunity to reintroduce and re-establish systems and species that are, as per our slides and our information, very clearly under threat in the broader landscape in Australia. We've seen some dramatic results as a result of both our work in managing ecosystems and reintroducing threatened species into that protected environment. Very significant increases in density of those animals, but equally very significant increases in ecosystem value and ecosystem production and interaction. So although we may be thinking of these safe havens as a reintroduction for small mammals in many cases, what we've very clearly found by our science and monitoring program is that the overall system is responding extremely well. So, we see all records of reptiles and bird life and systems within soils, as well as vegetation systems improving dramatically. We have certainly increased our investment in the feral predator proof areas. We've most recently opened and launched our fenced area in Mount Tarravale in North Queensland, which is the first of its kind in Northern Australia, addressing some of the challenges of climate and landscape. And we've recently reintroduced the northern bettong to that fenced area. Northern bettong is certainly, very highly considered as one of the small mammals potentially to be going extinct, under threat of extinction in the near future. So that's a really important outcome and really demonstrates our success in delivering these projects. Yeah,
great, Tim. So demonstration of the depth and years of experience of undertaking these programs. So Dave, in the context of the public estate, where you've had long term of different management arrangements, you've considered and have tested and applied this new approach into the public estate. You obviously felt this was necessary, and you've talked about the reasons why this is considered a significant requirement. How has it been received in the context of the public estate, having these sanctuaries in place?
It's broadly been received very positively. To date, the project has resulted in 11 species that were formerly extinct within New South Wales being returned to New South Wales national parks, and that's no minor task. I think that's one of the most significant restoration projects in the world, and we're not finished yet. We want to expand the number of populations of those species, but in addition, we've got our eyes set on a number of other species where we can return them back to New South Wales parks as well.
Yeah, great. What have been, then turning to the project, some of the biggest challenges or barriers that you've had in this establishment phase?
It's fair to say that there are considerable costs associated with rewilding initiatives, particularly in not only the investment but ongoing management of these areas. And developing partnerships has really assisted in both the resourcing of these projects, but also improving the conservation outcomes of the projects. I think there also have been some challenges in terms of streamlining the planning and approvals for emergency kind of actions, such that we can get a timely response to what is an immediate extinction risk.
Yeah, fantastic. Tim, would you reflect on any of the challenges or barriers in the project implementation phase?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Look, I think, Dave mentioned there, some of the barriers are from a very practical level associated with conducting a significant infrastructure project in a protected area. The regulatory and legislative environment around, things like clearing vegetation, construction of significant fencing, infrastructure, are certainly some of the main things. The additional ones are associated with things like the feral predator control and the monitoring and reporting associated with those activities. Like anywhere, not just state protected areas, we are dealing with things like firearms and bait materials and mechanisms and all sorts of things which require regulation and accreditation. So it was certainly challenging for Australian Wildlife Conservancy as a private entity to engage in that environment on a protected area, and it took quite some time in working with the National Parks and Wildlife project managers in relation to establishing a platform where, firstly, the regulatory and legislative environment was identified clearly, and then also, as Dave mentioned, supporting us in streamlining the approval process, the regulation or the accreditation required. We're probably just past halfway through the current project and current contract term, and the relationship is extremely positive. It's extremely collaborative. And we've really seen the benefit of some of those hard yards in those early days, where the platform, it absolutely needed to be established about who was undertaking, who was responsible, and who was accountable for these types of activities. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm going to turn to a few questions in a second about the partnership, because one of the things that we like to explore in this webinar series is the relationship between organisations, so that we can learn and benefit from these unique partnerships. But I've got one more question around the project itself, and I guess it's a question around the longevity of this as a tool and a solution. So I suppose the question to both of you, is being responsible for privately managed sanctuaries and public estate sanctuaries, is what term or time frame we see this as a solution, and what needs to be put in place, or do we hope that species can ultimately roam freely in time? And if this were to occur, what would be needed for that to happen? Maybe go to, I don't know which one of you wants to go first. I'll let you put your hand up.
I can answer
jump in, Dave.
Yeah, look, the establishment of these predator-free areas, safe havens, is a medium to long-term strategy to prevent extinctions and restore populations. I think the missing element at the moment is that there is no effective landscape scale strategy in place for feral cat control in New South Wales or Australia for that matter, and that we need improved methods of control and eradication, and that might involve genetic tools or improved baits and baiting techniques. Unfortunately, developing these new tools could take decades, and there's no guarantee of success. So I think it's important that we have these sites in place as in the immediate term, but over time we are looking at having those solutions in place, but also a beyond the fence kind of strategy where native animals can persist in low fox and cat density areas and remain at a viable population size.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Tim?
Yep, that's excellent. Thanks, Dave. There is no other way to describe it that the feral predator-proof fences, like all tools in managing feral predators or the extinction crisis, as we might describe it, is not a tool in its own. It's not the solution. We think that collaboration, such as this model, and collaboration with all sorts of other organisations and entities and landholders is part of it, but also the development and research of landscape as well as specific control methods for things like feral predators and that landscape value. A lot of the research that the Australian Wildlife Conservancy is undertaking, particularly in Northern Australia, is focusing on some of that landscape questions, such as reducing overall grazing pressure in areas to maintain ground cover as habitat and foraging and refuge for small mammals and reptiles. Against the findings of the success of predation from things like cats and foxes in areas that are cleared of ground cover. So, we can think about that approach, but it's not a solution on its own. That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk at all, Tim, to any of the successes you've had in your outside the fence strategy, where you've undertaken those kinds of activities that you've just described?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the monitoring that the Australian Wildlife Conservancy undertakes across all of our properties on an annual basis, as well as a cyclic, more specific monitoring review, certainly approaches things like a combination of contemporary fire management, as well as reducing grazing pressure, as well as the specific reduction in feral animals and feral predators. We do often see a more stable approach to the abundance and the density of native animals across those areas. But a lot of our work is ongoing in relation to what we can do with our native animals in these protected feral-proof areas, and how they might eventually be incorporated back into the natural environment outside the fenced area. But there's some very specific and considerable questions about how we release those animals from those protected state havens. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. An immense body of work and years of experience and research that's gone on to inform the decisions that we're making and the partnerships we're forming. So on partnerships, you both touched a little bit indirectly on, the opportunities and the need to set up these unique partnerships. So I'm really keen to dive in a little bit more around what it takes to make a public-private partnership work. And so, between government and non-government institutions, what are the key factors that you think are required to make a successful partnership work that you can reflect on in relation to this partnership?
Yeah, I think firstly, having a clear vision of what success looks like. Obviously, strong leadership from both parties, and a long-term commitment to not only the project, but its success and funding and resourcing and the like. And in terms of these projects and our partnership with AWC, for me, you know, it's really based on goodwill. That relationship with AWC has been really strong, really positive, and I think it's largely due to the individuals involved. It's not about the contract as such. It's that shared vision and passion from both sides, willingness to work together, you know, work through problems constructively, and you know, always continually improve. And I think that's the reason why this has been a success in my eyes.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Do you agree, Tim?
Yeah, totally agree. And I think the main item that I'll probably add is just a collaborative communication to that shared ambition. You know, we're both coming at it from different angles, but so long as we collaboratively have commitment to that shared ambition of success of the project, it's worked very well. Yeah, Dave mentioned there, it absolutely has come down to that communication relationship between the people involved in the projects.
Yeah, fantastic. So you've drawn on some of the things that make it work. What about individual organisational strengths, particularly to the context of the project that you're working on? Where have you drawn on each other's skills, experience or strengths to make the actual project itself a success?
I can start by saying, obviously, National Parks manages over 10% of New South Wales, and has a long, successful history in land management across the protected area network. But in terms of the partnership, I think it recognises the experience and expertise from AWC in threatened species conservation programs, particularly rewilding programs, and I see AWC as a world leader in that area. So partnering with AWC to you know, not only establish but also for the ongoing management of these sites was logical, you know, and I think the success is you know, in the writing that we've now seen 11 locally extinct animal species returned to the landscape, which is huge.
Yeah, fantastic. Tim, what about you? What skills from the private land conservation sector do you think are important to bring into this, and also what have you benefited from your learnings with parks?
Yeah, sure. And yeah, thanks, Dave, for your very kind words. Look, I think one of the main things that Australian Wildlife Conservancy has brought to these projects and this collaboration is probably flexibility. You know, an opportunity to apply flexibility and initiative to, you know, practical solutions to these types of developments and projects and so on. Very clearly, we have the opportunity to draw on experience of our existing and associated colleagues and bring them in with I think often some greater flexibility than you know, than the state or the large organisation administration may have. Equally, there have been absolutely important outcomes achieved through relying on the support of the regulatory and legislative capacity that Dave's team and the broader you know, National Parks team has been able to bring to the project for some of those regulatory and legislative problems that we've mentioned before. We certainly had one of those challenges, as everybody would be aware of, with Rambo the fox, and a working group established by Dave's team was really pivotal in terms of reviewing a whole range of practical solutions that also required some significant regulatory and legislative either amendment or you know, navigation to see some really good cooperation of the two parties in the collaboration to get through and look at those solutions. So I think it's been a really good mix. Yeah.
Great. Who then are some of the other have you got any other partners through this particular project? And Tim, in the context of your broader work, who might some of your other partners be, and how might there be opportunities through your work for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander engagement and leadership through the programs?
I'll start by saying that within New South Wales National Parks, we've recently signed an agreement for the joint management of the entire National Park estate with Aboriginal traditional custodians of the land. And so over time, we'll see that joint management of our parks expand and increase. It in itself is a historic commitment, and I think in terms of the rewilding initiatives, as we expand the network throughout other bioregions across New South Wales, there's opportunities to partner with a number of people, including local conservation groups, but also with different states and territories. As you know, some species now only persist in other states. As an example, eastern bettong is now only found in the wild in Tasmania. So partnering with the Tasmanian government and other organisations like Mulligan's Flat Woodland Sanctuary, other sanctuaries, is an important part of the program going forward. Over to you, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Look, yeah, Dave's touched on some important points in relation to availability and different threatened species and different organisations or administrations that hold those. Through the project, we've consulted local traditional owner groups around the Pilliga and the Mallee Cliffs sites and projects. We've also had some outcomes with local council, local tourism operators and representative entities in relation to some of our engagement outcomes as part of the project, and some presentation and promotion of the project locally to those communities. More broadly, Australian Wildlife Conservancy has engaged with both state and federal government in a number of different projects and collaborations. For example, we undertake work in the Kimberley with the Department of Defence, as well as two significant Indigenous representative landholding groups, the Willingham and Dubby Aboriginal corporations. And in fact, if we think about some other significant collaborations, we think about 50% of the mainland being currently under grazing and production, so that's a significant collaboration for us as well. And we've started some very specific projects in relation to working with grazing landholders as well. So there shouldn't be a limitation to the approach, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Thanks, Dave. Partnership's so important. You touched on engagement as well then, which goes to a question that's come through our chat. What's the strategy behind it? And Tim, you mentioned it broadly around, some of AWC's broader work and parks, obviously engaging this as well. What's the strategy behind public education, in particular for this partnership, particularly in the remote locations? And is there the prospect of similar partnerships in more publicly accessible parks or protected areas? Maybe start with you, Dave, in the context of the project itself and the parks response.
Yeah, look, for each of our project sites, we develop a communication and stakeholder engagement strategy. So we identify each of the key players that are involved at a local level and then at a regional and state level. And And in terms of education, we have been with one of our sites in Western Sydney where we have a large population base. It's an opportunity for us to communicate and increase the awareness of threatened species and their plight in, to a large audience. So as part of that planning phase, we've partnered with a number of the environmental education centres, the schools, and we're trying to develop, I guess, ownership of these sites so that that the local community then becomes intrinsically involved in the ongoing management, but also protection of these areas into the future.
Thanks, Dave. Tim, what about you?
Yeah, thanks, Jodie and Dave. Yeah, so certainly one of our key values, certainly one of our key approaches in our model is the engagement, and even the very premise of partnerships and collaborations. It's certainly not something that any one entity can take on itself. So the engagement and the public education is certainly an important. A really important tool. It's very difficult to really take people and immerse them sometimes in some of these physical project outcomes, because we often joke about it. All of these small mammals they are quite small. They're very they're very secretive. They're obviously nocturnal, so it's not easy to take large groups of people and physically immerse them in the practical outcomes of the project. So that public education piece and that engagement in the overall picture is really important. Yeah.
Jodie, if I may just also say that, across the country, people are generally accepting that when they go to a national park, they don't see many animals, and it's almost like this shifting baseline and acceptance. However, we don't accept that. We want to see the bush, bouncing with native animals like they used to.
Yeah. Got to get out there at night, I guess, though, for some of that, don't you?
Yeah.
It's a really good point, and I think we've reflected that as well in the context of the sound of birds. I was, Tim, listening to the whipbird in the back out the back of your door there. It's fantastic, and just this idea that over time the sound of our bush has declined is a really it's a really sad and tragic thing, but it's also a really poignant thing to point out to people and helps them connect to the kind of loss that we're facing, which takes us to the future. Obviously, we want to see that decline turn around. What are the opportunities for further growth for this partnership and for your work independently?
Firstly, in terms of the current sites, we're at a really good stage now where each of the sites is completely declared as eradicated from feral animals. The reintroduction program is in full swing. We've got a number of other exciting species in the pipeline for reintroductions. Species like burrowing bettongs, western quoll, and other species, Gould's mouse, for instance, so which again haven't been seen in for over a century. Still do. Once those animals are reintroduced, then they still have to establish a sustainable population, and we can monitor their success over time, and also the change in the ecosystem over time. But as we also expand the network of feral-free areas, there's other opportunities to partner on those projects, particularly the ecological components of those projects. Obviously, we need to learn and build on the success of this current project, and AWC is one of the knowledge holders there that will be intrinsic to seeing the success of these other projects as they roll out across the state.
Great. And Tim, can you reflect on deepening of the relationship you've got with parks here, but also are there other partnerships that you're looking at, beyond New South Wales across the public estate?
Yeah, thanks, Jodie. Look, I think importantly, as Dave mentioned, with the additional projects in New South Wales, there is a real momentum established by the relationship and the collaboration of the people involved in the Pilliga and Mallee Cliffs projects. So that collaboration is really strong in the background, as it should be with any entities taking on these projects. They are significant investments, and they are significant projects to deliver. And as Dave said, there is an enormous amount of work to do for a considerable period of time beyond the fence and beyond the feral eradication work. So we're certainly committed to, as we are with all of our relationships that we have, to continue that communication and collaboration. If it takes on more formal engagement, then certainly that's something that AWC is committed to continuing to explore. In terms of other partnerships and other arrangements, I don't have anything specific to open the door on at the moment, but certainly you can see by that graph in terms of both scaling up, but also the diversity in which some of those collaborations are now existing. And particularly, as I've mentioned, a really exciting space is the opportunity to work with grazing landholders and primary production landholders in relation to the extent of the landscape and the extent of natural spaces which are held, and the opportunities that we have in terms of working directly with them. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Plenty of work to do. We need as many tools in the toolbox as we can to deal with the challenges, and as many people out on the ground, across public estate, private estate, Aboriginal owned land, really working on the challenge that we collectively face. So it's been really great hearing from you both about this really important partnership. The way you've forged the relationship, I think, you had a nice triple C there: commitment, collaboration, and communication as some of the key things that were important to your partnership that you drew out there, among a few other things like vision and leadership. So it was really fantastic to hear about what it takes to build these relationships, to create the partnerships, and ultimately to get out on the ground and undertake the action that's required. And we need more of that, more investment in that, and strong policy to guide the way. So thank you for your work and your organisation's work in this effort. For those of you that have joined us, you've been lucky to hear the conversation today. The recording will be made available in the next week or so for others to also catch up with the discussion, so keep your eyes out for that. The fourth and the final webinar in our Unite for Nature series will be a conversation with PLC 23 conference partner Bush Heritage Australia. And they'll be talking about and with their partnership with JARA, the organisation representing the Dja Dja Wurrung people of Central Victoria. So do stay tuned for that exciting conversation that'll take place on Thursday, the 17th of August. A reminder that these 4 webinars and the people who are speaking with us, are joining us in the context of the discussion Unite for Nature, leading up to the fantastic conference that will be held in October on Ngunnawal country, October 16th to the 19th. So please, the tickets are on sale now. Get your tickets. Unite for Nature reflects that protecting, managing and restoring our natural environment is everyone's business, as we've heard very clearly today. And we look forward to bringing a diverse range of stakeholders together to explore the solutions that we can all be part of. As we said, early bird registrations are currently open. The early bird ticket prices close on the 11th of August. So register early. Again, thank you for attending. Thank you, Tim and Dave, for a really fantastic, inspiring and interesting discussion and we will see you all again soon. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Dave.